Queen Alara walked through the long halls of her palace, the sound of her steps echoing softly on the marble floor. She was loved by her people, respected by her council, and feared by her rivals. Yet inside her heart there was an emptiness she could not hide. She had no child, no heir to carry her bloodline forward. Every feast, every gathering, every ceremony, she saw the unspoken looks of worry. Without an heir, the kingdom's future felt uncertain. In the quiet of her chambers, she would sometimes hold an old cradle carved by her mother. It had remained empty for many years. She had tried to remain strong, but the weight of it pressed against her soul. Her council grew restless, whispering behind closed doors. A kingdom could not live on hope alone, they said. The queen must give them an heir, or risk losing the throne. Nights grew longer with unease. Alara would gaze out at the stars, her mind torn between duty and despair. She had ruled with wisdom, defended her lands, and protected her people, yet this one thing she could not give. It made her feel powerless, as if all her victories were not enough. Then came the council's decision. Bound by ancient treaties written long before her time, the advisors declared she must accept a partner from beyond her world. It was not her choice, but their voices pressed down on her like a storm. Their words were clear: a bond must be made, and perhaps through it, life would finally come. Alara resisted at first. How could she, a queen who had built her life on strength and pride, accept such a fate? But the truth weighed on her. The kingdom was restless, and rivals circled like wolves. Without hope of an heir, her crown might fall into the hands of those who would undo all she had fought for. The name they gave her was Daniel, a teacher from a quiet town on Earth. He was chosen not for rank or riches, but for his heart, his record of kindness, and his courage in times of hardship. Lara did not understand why fate had placed his name before her, yet the treaty demanded it. She felt the sting of surrender as she prepared to meet him. When Daniel arrived, he looked nothing like the noble warriors of her court. He wore no armor, carried no sword, and spoke with a gentleness that felt foreign in the palace. His eyes carried wonder at the sights around him, yet there was no fear. He greeted her not as a ruler, but as a person. And for the first time in many years, Alara felt seen not as a queen, but as a woman. Still, she held her guard high. She told herself this was duty, nothing more. A bond to secure the throne, nothing deeper. But something in Daniel's calm presence unsettled her walls. He listened when she spoke, not about laws or wars, but about her heart, her fears, her dreams. He did not look at her crown, he looked at her eyes. As the palace watched in silence, Alara began to wonder if destiny had not betrayed her after all. The path ahead was uncertain, and the whispers of the council had not faded. Yet in the quiet between her and the man from Earth, there was a small spark she had not felt in many years. It was not yet love, nor trust, but it was something that reached beyond duty. And deep within, though she would not yet say it aloud, she began to hope again. Daniel stood at the gates of the palace, his eyes wide as he tried to take in the vast stone towers and endless halls. Back on Earth, he had lived a quiet life. He was a teacher, used to simple days filled with books, chalk, and the laughter of children. And now he was in a place that felt like a dream. Though his heart raced, he carried himself with calm, not wanting to appear weak before the queen or her people. When he was led into the great hall, Queen Alara sat upon her throne. Her crown shimmered beneath the torches, and her eyes studied him with quiet strength. Daniel bowed awkwardly, not knowing the customs, but his gesture was honest. Many in the court whispered, doubting him, calling him unworthy of such a union. He heard the murmurs, but kept his head high. Alara regarded him with cool distance. To her, he was a symbol of duty, nothing more. She expected arrogance or fear, but instead she saw a steady man who seemed more curious than frightened. His plain clothing set him apart from the lords and knights, yet his posture held no shame. She found that strange. He should have been overwhelmed, yet he carried a simple dignity that unsettled her thoughts. Days passed as Daniel settled into the palace. He walked the gardens, asked questions of the servants, and treated everyone with respect. Though he was new to their ways, he showed kindness that did not need teaching. Some laughed at him for being plain, but others began to admire his gentle spirit. He did not try to act greater than he was, simply listened, spoke with honesty, and carried himself with patience. Queen Alara kept her distance at first. She did not want to give him power over her heart. Yet she could not ignore the way he treated her. He did not bow only to her crown. He bowed to her as a person. When she spoke of the burdens of rule, he did not answer with pride or false advice. He only listened. And in his silence, she felt a comfort she had not known. There were nights when the council pressed her, urging her to move faster in forming a bond. They spoke of duty, heirs, and stability. Alara nodded but felt the weight of their voices grow heavy. She looked at Daniel, sitting quietly by the fire, reading from a small book he had carried from Earth. In his presence, she felt a strange peace, as if the storm outside could not touch her. During one evening, Alara asked him why he never showed fear. Daniel smiled and said he had lived through many storms of his own. They were not battles of kingdoms, but battles of life. He told her of the years when he lost his parents and still cared for his younger sister. He told her of the times he had no money, but kept teaching children, because it gave him purpose. His trials were not the same as hers, yet the courage behind them was real. For the first time in many years, Alara felt she was speaking not as a queen, but as a woman. She shared with him her fears, her doubts, and the pain of being seen only as a ruler and never as a soul. Daniel did not judge her. He only told her she was strong for carrying such weight and still standing tall. The days slowly turned to weeks. The court still doubted, and rivals outside the palace began to watch closely. They thought the bond between queen and common man was a weakness. But within the palace walls, something small was changing. Alara and Daniel walked together in the gardens, spoke by the fire, and began to share laughter that the queen had long forgotten. Though it was not yet love, it was something new, something that gave them both strength. Alara felt her walls soften, while Daniel felt his quiet heart open to a destiny he had never imagined. The bond that began as duty now carried the spark of something deeper, something that might one day change not only the palace but the future of the kingdom itself. The kingdom was not at peace. Though Queen Alara and Daniel had begun to find a quiet bond within the palace, the lands beyond its walls stirred with danger. Neighboring rulers saw the union as weakness. They called Daniel unworthy and spread whispers that the queen had lost her strength. The council grew nervous, warning Alara that enemies might soon strike. She carried herself with calm, but inside her heart tightened with worry. She knew war might come, and she feared what it would mean for her people. Daniel began to notice the tension. He was no warrior, yet he could see the unease in the guards, and hear the sharp tone of the council's voices. Many did not trust him, and some even hoped he would fail. But instead of retreating, he sought ways to help. He walked among the soldiers, speaking with them, listening to their fears. He spoke not as a commander, but as a friend. Though some laughed at his plain ways, others found comfort in his words, gave them hope that their queen was not alone. One night, shadows moved through the palace. An attempt was made on the queen's life. Blades flashed in the dark as masked men stormed her chamber. Alara reached for her sword, ready to fight. But before the guards could arrive, Daniel rushed to her side. He had no weapon, yet he threw himself into the struggle, using only his strength and courage. Together, they held the attackers back until the soldiers burst in and captured the intruders. Alara looked at Daniel in shock, for he had risked everything without hesitation. In his eyes, she saw no fear, only the will to protect her. The council could no longer dismiss him so easily. They had seen his courage, and though some still doubted, others began to respect the man from Earth. Alara herself felt something stir within her. She had expected him to flee, but instead he had stood firm beside her. It was a reminder that strength did not always come from training or power, but from heart. In the days that followed, threats grew louder. Armies gathered on the borders, ready to test the queen's will. Alara prepared for war, calling her knights and captains. She spent long hours in council, planning defenses and strategies. Daniel, though not a soldier, offered thoughts that surprised them. He spoke of how on Earth he had faced struggles not with swords, but with unity. He suggested ways to keep the people calm, to bring them together so fear would not break them apart. It was not the language of war, but it was wisdom the queen valued. As battles loomed, Alara and Daniel stood often side by side. In the quiet moments, they shared more of their hearts. She spoke of her childhood, of the weight of the crown that had been placed on her head too young. He told her of his students, the way their laughter had once been his greatest joy. Though their worlds were far apart, their pain and their dreams began to weave together. When the enemy finally struck, the kingdom was ready. The clash was fierce, the night filled with fire and steel.
Alara rode at the front, her blade shining, her people rallying behind her.
Daniel did not fight with a sword, but he worked to guide the wounded to safety, to bring supplies where they were needed, to hold the line of spirit when it began to falter. The queen saw him amid the chaos, and her heart swelled with pride. He was no longer a stranger from another land. He was her partner, her strength. The enemy was pushed back, their plans broken by the unity of the kingdom. The palace celebrated, but Alara knew the war was not over. Still, she also knew she was no longer standing alone. Daniel had become more than duty. He was becoming her anchor in the storm. She looked at him that night, his clothes torn and his hands bruised, and she felt a warmth that she had not allowed herself to feel in many years. It was not yet spoken, but it was clear. Their bond had begun to grow into something deeper, something that could change the course of their future forever. The weeks after the battle were heavy with both relief and fear. The kingdom had stood strong, but the threat of war still lingered. Queen Alara moved through her palace with steady grace, yet her mind often returned to Daniel. He had stood beside her in the darkest hour, not with a sword, but with a heart that refused to break. She had seen him tend to the wounded, speak to the frightened, and give strength where there was none. It left a mark on her that she could not ignore. One quiet morning, Alara felt something strange within herself. At first, she thought it was only the weariness of endless days. But as time passed, she realized it was something more. The royal healer confirmed what seemed impossible. She was carrying a child. For years, she had lived under the shadow of emptiness, believing herself cursed to never bear an heir. Now, against all odds, life had taken root within her. The news spread through the palace like fire through dry fields. At first, the council was stunned into silence. Then their voices rose with excitement and disbelief. Many cried that it was a miracle, a sign of hope sent to save the kingdom. People beyond the palace walls rejoiced, for the prophecy had long spoken of a time when love would bring renewal to the crown. Enemies who had mocked her now grew fearful, for the heir meant strength, and strength meant unity. Alara, however, did not think of power when she first heard the news. She thought of Daniel. She thought of his quiet smile, his gentle words, his hands that had held hers in the fire of battle. She remembered the nights when he listened as she spoke her fears, never judging, only offering comfort. It was not duty that had brought this child into being. It was something far greater. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe that destiny had been kind. When she told Daniel, his eyes filled with tears. He fell silent for a long moment, his heart too full to speak. Then he took her hands and promised that no matter what came, he would stand by her and the child. He was a teacher, not a warrior. Yet in that moment he looked stronger than any knight in shining armor. Alara felt her heart soften fully, the walls she had built for so many years crumbling into dust. As her body changed with the weeks, the bond between them grew deeper. They walked the gardens together in the evenings, speaking of the future. Daniel would tell her stories of children he once taught, their laughter and their innocence. Alara would smile and imagine their child playing in those same gardens, bringing joy to a palace that had known only silence. The thought filled her with warmth she had long forgotten. Not all voices in the court were kind. There were still those who doubted, those who whispered that the child might bring more division than peace. But when Alara walked among her people, she saw their eyes shining with hope. Mothers placed her hands upon their children, blessing them through her touch. Fathers lifted their heads with pride, saying their queen was no longer alone. In their joy, she found courage to ignore the doubts. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Alara stood beside Daniel on the balcony. The city below glowed with light as the people celebrated with song and fire. Daniel wrapped his arm gently around her and she leaned into his warmth. For a long time they said nothing, only watched the stars appear in the darkening sky. In that silence, she realized she was no longer just a queen fighting for her people. She was a woman loved, and soon to be a mother. The prophecy had spoken of renewal through love, and though she had never trusted such words before, she now believed them. The heir growing inside her was not only a child of royal blood, but a child born of faith, of patience, and of a bond that had begun in the most unlikely way. Lara knew the road ahead would not be easy, that enemies would not rest. But with Daniel at her side and the child in her womb, she felt a strength she had never known. The kingdom's story was changing, and so was her own. The months passed slowly, filled with both joy and worry. Queen Alara carried her child with care, guarded closely by her people. The palace was alive with hope, yet outside its walls, enemies still watched. Some rulers feared the birth of the heir, for it meant the kingdom would not fall. They planned in secret, hoping to strike before the child was born. Alara knew danger was near, but she also knew she would not face it alone. Daniel never left her side. He stayed with her through sleepless nights and long days, reminding her she was not only a queen, but also a woman loved. When fear tried to creep into her heart, he spoke words that lifted her spirit. He told her stories from his home, of rivers and forests, of children who played freely, without worry of crowns or wars. She listened with quiet smiles, dreaming of giving their child the same peace. When the day finally came, the palace filled with silence and prayer. Alara labored through pain and strength, her hand clasped tightly in Daniel's. He never let go, whispering courage with every breath she took. At last the cry of a child broke through the halls, clear and strong. A son was born, small, yet fierce, his eyes bright as though carrying the fire of both parents within him. Lara held him close, tears streaming down her face. She had thought this day would never come, yet now the cradle that once stood empty was filled with life. News spread quickly across the kingdom. Bells rang. Fires burned bright in celebration, and the people filled the streets with joy. They called the child the heir of hope, a gift that had come when all faith had nearly been lost. Mothers lifted their children high, fathers bowed their heads in thanks. For the first time in many years, unity swept through the land like a rising tide. The council, once divided, now stood together. Even those who had doubted Daniel bowed before him, acknowledging that his heart had given the kingdom new life. He was no longer just the teacher from Earth. He was the father of a dynasty, bound forever to the history of the crown. Lara, watching him cradle their son, felt her love deepen beyond words. He had walked into her world as a stranger, but now he was her strength, her partner, and the father of her child. Yet the birth of the heir did not end all threats. Rival forces gathered once more, testing the resolve of the queen. But when they looked upon the banners rising above the city, when they heard the songs of the people celebrating their new prince, fear struck their hearts. To attack now would be to face a kingdom united not only by power, but by love and faith in their queen. Slowly, the enemies pulled back, their courage fading. Life in the palace began to change. The halls once filled with quiet sorrow now rang with the cries of a child and the laughter of parents who had found joy in each other. Daniel would carry the boy through the gardens, showing him the flowers and telling him stories of both Earth and the kingdom. Lara would sit nearby, her heart warmed by the sight, knowing her son would grow surrounded by both strength and kindness. As seasons passed, the child grew, and so did the bond between Alara and Daniel. Together they ruled with wisdom and compassion, guiding their people not through fear, but through hope. The people loved their queen, but now they also loved the family she had built. The story of sorrow had turned into a story of renewal. One evening, Alara stood on the balcony with Daniel, their son, asleep in her arms. The city below glowed with light, the stars above endless and bright. She turned to Daniel and whispered that she was no longer afraid of the future. He smiled and told her they had already begun to build it together. In that quiet moment, she knew their love had not only saved her crown, but had given birth to a legacy that would last far beyond their lives. The childless queen had become the mother of an heir. The teacher had become the father of a kingdom. And together, they had written a story that would be told for generations. A story of love that conquered despair and hope, that gave birth to a brighter tomorrow.